Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 326. Greta.
John.
So we meet again.
Oh, sounds rather ominous.
Yes.
But yes, we do. We meet again.
Yes. In this episode,
what are the chances?
What are the chances, right? Fancy meeting you here. In this episode, we're joined by Chris Hackett, a seminary professor, philosopher, author, and translator. Chris will be joining us for our annual discussion of By Niggle, what Tolkien called his purgatorial short story. More about Chris in just a second. First, we'd like to give a double up air five to our amazing fellowship. Hands up, stick them up. 3, 2, 1. Whoopsh. All right,
Nice.
Nicely done. Nicely done.
that.
Thanks for joining us, Chris.
Yes.
Bucket list. Did it.
Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, Jacob Lockham, John H., and Eru27. Also, a shout out to those celebrating their fellowship anniversary in January of 2023. JoeBagelMan, David G., Cynthia C., Mike M., John R., Scott W., Jason T., Alina V., Melanie, Tyler W. Thank you all so much for sticking with us over the last year. It's February now, so I probably need to update that list before I record another episode. So apologies to our February people. We appreciate you too, and we will be getting to that. All right. Always fun transitioning to a new month with our patrons. All right. Hey, Fellowship of the Road, join the Fellowship of the Road by visiting patreon.com/TolkienRoad. When you join the Fellowship of the Road, it helps us to keep on evering on and land you cool perks along the way, like 20% off of our merch, including Tolkien Road t-shirts, the coveted True Trees camper mug, and signed copies of my books. Learn more at patreon.com/TolkienRoad. YouTube, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know what's on your mind in the comments below. All right. Per his website, HackettWrites.com, Chris Hackett is a philosopher and writer living in the rural Midwest of the United States. He works at a Benedictine abbey. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Yeah. Thanks for being here.
It is an honor to have you. And we're really glad you're here.
Mhm.
We're really glad you're here to talk about By Niggle, and we're going to jump into that in just a moment. But first, tell us about yourself. Tell us more about yourself. I mean, just in those two sentences by themselves, there's a lot of interesting things to unpack. Philosopher, writer, Benedictine abbey, rural Midwest, all of these things. So wherever you want to start, feel free to start.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, I live in the rural Midwest, as it said. I live in Indiana, and I work at a Benedictine monastery as a professor at the seminary there, St. Meinrad Seminary, and I teach philosophy. So teach ancient and medieval philosophy, political philosophy, philosophy of knowledge, and every now and then I get to teach a little bit of theology, if that works out in the schedule. So I've been here for 3 years at St. Meinrad, and I love every second of my job. Teaching seminarians is a dream come true. And I've been lived in a number of places, in Australia, England, France, pursuing studies and then teaching, but ended up here, and we love it. I have my family here in Indiana. So also I'm not only a philosopher, but also a writer. I write fiction. And so my first book, Outside the Gates, is a work of historical fiction and about World War II escape narrative. And so that union of, I suppose, narrative and theory sort of captured two aspects of my personality and two aspects of understanding in general that does a lot of work, I suppose, not only in culture, but also just in any individual, because we all use concept and theory to understand, but also more prominently, probably narrative and story. So,
yeah. I mean, so your book, Outside the Gates, it is, I'm going to read the little snippet here. I've read the book, and it's quite good. The gates of Drancy internment camp in the northeast suburbs of Paris served as a holding pen for thousands of Jews during the German occupation of France in World War II. Jean Wall, philosophy professor, poet, bachelor at the top of Parisian society before his arrest, was among those very few who escaped. So, this is people who visit your website, HackettWrites.com. They're going to find that you seem to have a a particular fascination with this individual, Jean Wall, who you wrote this book about, which is a fictional book, but it's more like historic fiction, right? It's more like it's about a real person, right?
It is.
So, tell us more about this individual, Jean Wall, and your fascination with him.
Well, yeah, he's a man, a Jewish philosopher in France during a very horrible time in Europe's Western civilization's history during World War II and the invasion of France by Germany. He suffered terribly for a year. He lost his job at the Sorbonne. He was professor of philosophy at the Sorbonne, sort of the pinnacle of a philosopher's life in France. He achieved it. And then 3 years later, he was kicked off the faculty for his Jewish ancestry. And he was a vocal critic of the regime, which got him in a lot of trouble. And he was interrogated, arrested, brutalized, put first in prison, and then moved to the internment camp outside of Paris, Drancy, which, by the way, was a place where around 70,000 people were moved out of France to eventually to concentration camps in Eastern Europe. And but he, through machinations of it was out of his hands completely, through the machinations of friends near and far, people, resistance fighters inside the camp, in fact, that worked there as medical professionals, like a nurse and a doctor. They helped him escape, and he escaped. He went into hiding in Paris, eventually made it to the free zone. At this time, it was still the zone south of France was still sort of quasi free, put that in quotation marks.
Yeah.
But he made it there, and eventually read the writing on the wall that the Germans were going to take over all of France, and he knew he had to leave Europe. He discovered that he was placed on, his name was placed, he was on a list of important intellectuals who American nonprofits wanted to help. So he was given a position at a university in America, and he made passage first to Morocco and then to the United States. And he saw the Baltimore skyline a year to the day of his arrest. So the story that I'm telling is outside the gates is just a little piece of that story, but that 1 year from his arrest to his arrival in the US, I plan to have as a 3 or 4 part series of novels. And the historical side of it, the sort of anchors of the story are all historical. Obviously, you have to fill in a lot of gaps. You create a lot of, as a writer, as a storyteller, you develop the story, but you want to stay true to history through fiction, and that's sort of an important feature of historical fiction. And so I did research at his archives in Normandy, and I translated one of his works called Human Existence and Transcendence. From Notre Dame Press. So that was sort of the beginning of it all, was going to his archive and for that academic work, translating his philosophy book, Human Existence and Transcendence. But there I learned so much more about his story and felt like it had to be told. So I gave it a shot.
So your fascination is really like a great philosopher and at the same time an amazing story, personal story of this man.
Yeah.
Personal triumph.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Any human story tells the human story. And so that's an important feature, I think. And his tells the human story in a particularly visceral way that I wanted to capture.
Well, I mean, just some of the things you said and like the role that creativity plays in all of this, what you said about narrative and the role that plays in how we understand the world. Even what you said just a few moments ago about his like being true to history through fiction. I feel like all those things are things that would have resonated very deeply with Tolkien and his, even though he was coming at storytelling from a very different place. First of all, as an Englishman. Second of all, as a philologist, though I feel like being a true philologist is not too far off from being a philosopher, kind of a philosopher in the like kind of hard sense of the term, right? All of it, of course, stems from philosophy. All of these different, fields stem from philosophy, but the study of words, as obsessed with as Tolkien was with words and these sorts of things. I feel like many of the things you just said would have resonated with him.
Yes, I in ways that are not fully apparent to me, I've been deeply formed by Tolkien, I think.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I feel like that's true of so many. If you've read Lord of the Rings, then it's like, then you have been,
I can remember the moment when the Lord of the Rings awakened some kind of deep desire in me. I'm still trying to understand what it is, but it was something. I was 12 years old and I read Lord of the Rings and just, I awoke to reality in a new way through that fiction, for sure.
You and me both. I mean, it's and so many different folks have said that, and it's like, but I love the part where it's like no one's able to quite explain or quite get at what it is. Just like,
well, yeah, that's when you know you're touching something real and significant, deeply human.
Yes.
And that's the work of philosophy as much as the work of literature.
Yeah. Oh, awesome.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Well, I mean, I could ask you so many more questions. It's interesting to hear, about your work as a seminary professor and your love for that, the work with seminarians. However, in the interest of your time, because I think you do have a hard stop, within a little bit of time. We could go on for probably several hours just talking about all these things, but I think we need to jump into By Niggle.
Okay.
Chris is joining us for what has become an annual tradition on the Tolkien Road. While we've covered Leaf by Niggle several times in the past and frequently referred to it, it's an incredible gem hidden behind the mountainous wonder that is the Middle-earth Legendarium. For me, it's a story that never ceases to fill me with wonder and joy, and if I'm being honest, it always manages to get me a little choked up. I suppose this effect has something to do with what Tolkien called Christian joy, that which produces tears because it is qualitatively so like sorrow, because it comes from those places where joy and sorrow are at one, reconciled as selfishness and altruism are lost in love. I wish people knew about this story like they knew about The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. I believe it is a truly life-changing story bearing the aura of supernatural inspiration like so much of Middle-earth. And it's a joy to discuss this story with others and to learn what they see in it. And so with that, Chris, you're going to join us to talk about this story. And to get things started, I wanted to read a quote from your website because I thought this was, again, like kind of touches on something is going on in Leaf by Niggle, which makes it so special. And this is where I'm going to butcher some French names. I'm a devotee of the French writer Jules Barbie d'Aurevilly. Did I get that name right?
That'll work. That'll fly.
Close enough. All right.
Fly.
As well as his protege of sorts, Léon Bloy. If I have learned something from them, it is that the success of a story hinges on the writer's capacity to communicate what he sees, what he considers to be the truth. No more, no less. Art enlarges our capacity for vision. I write novels because stories allow me to reach dimensions of the enigma that I am, that we humans, which otherwise remain sealed off. So those are your words. That's Chris speaking in first person in that quote. I mean, do you want to elaborate on that quote a little bit? And, just
yes, please. I'm going to answer that question.
Okay, great. I want you to elaborate on that quote. So
I can try. Yeah. Well, so those two authors named are two French writers that I'm in love with, I suppose, in terms of their writing. Very, very distinctive figures in Western letters. They together both were controversialists in some ways in the way they wrote and what they wrote about, the topics they wrote about. Not only because there was sort of an extremism of sorts in their writing. They wanted to be, the goal of the writer for both of those figures was to be true to reality, true to what's there. And storytelling opens up, how do you put it? There's a lot of ways to put it. I suppose you have to use metaphors, but it opens you up to the real in a way, to the truth of things in a way that's irreplaceable, just like music does in its own way, just like visual arts do in their own way, just like science does in its own way, and so on. But storytelling is its own way, and it's a way that we understand, and it's irreplaceable. If you lose storytelling, you lose something fundamental. You lose some fundamental access to reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so they both of those figures were sort of in your face about evil, about goodness,
Mm-hmm.
and I think beauty and ugliness. These deep contrasts in their writings that are quite intense. Are the ways in which they try to illuminate the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as somebody to, as far as two writers, I think they do that. They do that really well. A figure like Dostoevsky, to my mind, does that really, really well.
Mm.
They draw these deep contrasts, this sort of contradictions in human experience that illuminate what in the world we are. And I'm just fascinated by that.
Yeah. I mean, and that, does it help you, Greta?
Yes, no,
understand?
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree. And it was, I was thinking about this when you were talking earlier about how the story Leaf by Niggle kind of, it almost has this introspective quality to it where, like, even when I was like rereading it, like yesterday, I was like, I found myself thinking about myself, like while I was listening to the story, like, oh, wow. Like, you know, like the different things that Niggle did or that Parrish said or whatever. And I'm like, oh, you know, like kind of using it as almost like a mirror, you know, for my actions, things that I've, you know, done, said, thought, and maybe, you know, lots of ways that I could improve. And you know, things that I can learn, you know, be like, do this, don't do this.
Right.
Which that's a mark of truly great, you know, writing, I think. And just the idea of fantasy, like you think of Lord of the Rings, right? And I remember you saying that it kind of, it awakened you to reality when you read Lord of the Rings when you were 12. And I was like, wow. And that's like it's, you know, it's a made up universe. It's completely like fantastical in so many ways, but that has the power to awaken a sense of reality is, you know, I mean, it's mind boggling and beautiful and, you know.
Well, and it gets to that whole very Tolkienian, and I would assume an idea that these philosophers would probably speak to, that reality is not simply what is apparent to us on, you know, by our senses at any given moment, but includes that, but goes beyond that. That the true reality, the greater reality, encompasses more than merely what our senses behold.
Yes.
Yeah. And even more than that, we live in a culture, civilization that's sort of obsessed with one aspect of human understanding, which is what the ancients called logos, or reasoning. And that it's sort of an intensification of that dimension that sort of formed the basis of Western civilizations, you know, since the Enlightenment. And that was elevated to the detriment of what the ancients called mythos, or myth. And I think a figure like Tolkien is somebody who comes along and says, you know, we're shutting one eye, you know, and when you shut one eye, you can see, but you can't see as well. That's for sure. There's a depth of perception that two eyes adds, and this is a limited metaphor, but what myth gives you is a deeper vision. And it's a distinctive manner of understanding, and that, you know, it accesses, as we put it, the real in a way that that's different than logos or rationality alone.
I had this kind of impression of like the arts, in a way, like they do go, like they perhaps go through the mind, but they go more directly to the heart than other ways of knowing, other ways of perceiving, you know. Then maybe like then like what may be encompassed by ways of knowing encompassed by what you referred to as logos is reason, the mythos, right, which maybe encompasses, you know, various arts, you know, that they have a more direct access to the heart, you know, and to the, you know, to the innermost being, into our innermost being, in ways that and again, in like that way we were talking about, in ways that we're still like, they impact you, and you have to you almost have to step outside of yourself to understand what it's doing to you, right?
Mhm.
Like to be able to grasp, what it does to you.
Yep.
Um, yeah. So,
So,
go ahead.
oh, sorry. Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, if you think about the most important things, if you could like name those things: love, freedom, goodness, justice, the most difficult things too, evil, suffering, and above all, God.
Mm-hmm.
Mythos or storytelling addresses those. You enter into those things. You explore those realities in a way that is distinctive from rationality and reason, logos, but it can be compatible with it too. But I think logos has to recognize the depth and the integrity of mythos, and in fact, it has to recognize its roots in mythos. Not only historically, that logos was born out of. Storytelling is older.
Yeah,
humans were understanding much longer than humans were using concept and theory to understand. They were telling stories, and they were performing rituals in which they entered those stories and participated in reality in that way. And so I think one of the ways our civilization has to come to terms with itself is to recover that mythos dimension and recognize that as sort of this context or milieu in which scientific rationality, abstract rationality is sort of planted and bears its fruit, but it's only in that soil. Anyway.
yeah.
Mm.
Well, and it so we'll get into the kind of the directly into the story itself, but all of this makes my mind this sort of discussion makes my mind jump to the end of the story, or maybe the scene right before the end of the story, which is always just so interesting to me, like the dialogue or trialogue maybe between these three individuals that aren't in the story otherwise. And what's going on with that.
Yeah, you can even maybe go so far as to say is like that they're personifying this idea of logos and mythos. Like one of them is, very much in that logos state of mind, whereas the other one is more willing to, to be aware of and appreciate the mythos.
Yeah, almost like grotesquely so, right?
Yeah,
like,
it was like utterly utilitarian. Like the only thing that's meaningful is what's useful to what he sees as the good for society. But the other guy has this sort of, I can't get that the image, the leaf that Niggle painted out of his head. The guys couldn't understand that, and he sort of he was a little window open for that one guy.
Yeah,
or Atkins or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, we'll come back to that. Maybe we come back to that at the end, because I want to again, I think that's worth spending some time on itself. But Chris, I'm really like really interested to know like so you said this was the second time you'd read the story, but it's been a while. And and so I'm really interested to know like your just kind of your takeaway. What impressed you about it this time? What you enjoyed about it? Just whatever you kind of want to say before Greta and I dive in too much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think first off, what impressed me so much now that I'm pursuing a novelist type life is the artistry of the storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've read Lord of the Rings. The artistry is brilliant, but here, even in short story form, and which is not a fairy tale, perhaps. I mean, it has those elements to it. Maybe the story Leaf by Niggle has allegorical elements to it. It has autobiographical elements to it, and just the sophistication of the storytelling is quite brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Quite brilliant. Just the way that even the way places where he doesn't decide to make a new paragraph, but joins sort of disparate moments together is brilliant. The last line is just glorious. Laughing in the mountains ring with the. I mean, it's just he nailed it. It's like a Mozart always nails it, or not always, but in the great pieces of a great composer, they know where the note goes, and that's where it goes. That's what he does with words here.
It's like the the gymnast when they finish the like perfect routine, and they just like, and it's like the dismount and they stick the landing,
he nailed it.
Yeah. It's like a mic drop, right? Like,
he felt so good when he finished that line.
He did. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Chris.
No.
Yeah.
Well,
I
that's
would,
it.
yeah. And he wrote this like in one sitting, which is like
Well, that's the remarkable thing.
blows my mind. I mean, I'm not even a writer, but I can imagine
Yeah.
that just makes it even more like, whoa.
Well,
Yeah. It's very good artistically. I'm re-impressed with his skill.
Yeah.
As a storyteller with words.
Yeah.
on
Wordsmith,
a
yeah.
on a meta, like kind of meta level, what do you see happening in this story? Is in a, this is where I'm so interested, knowing you as a friend, having known you for years, and also as a philosopher, is just a person who thinks deeply for a living, right? Like, and also, and mainly because you love it, like what do you see going on in this story? There is like the creative part of it, but what do you see, like what do you see emerging as themes that really are that grip you?
Well, a lot. There's a whole lot going on theologically, philosophically. There's great metaphysical claims implied in the story, and great theological claims implied. And I haven't read it. I mean, even the first time I read it ages ago, and now again, I read it along with On Fairy Stories. And I really think I know they were published together at some point, and he says they go together like tree and leaf. And I guess that's the title of
that's the title of this one, which was the volume that I have that I originally read it in, which is, and that was the original. Originally it was just On Fairy Stories. I believe it was just On Fairy Stories and Leaf by Niggle were published together as Tree and Leaf, but there's a couple of additional works in the current edition of Tree and Leaf.
Yeah. And talking about mythos and logos, you have narrative manner of understanding with Leaf by Niggle. You have a theoretical conceptual approach to fairy stories, to his art, attempted in On Fairy Stories. So you have that duality of human understanding represented right there in these two texts. And I do think in a lot of fundamental ways, what's articulated conceptually and theoretically in On Fairy Stories is elaborated and explored in Leaf by Niggle. Yeah. So, do you want to jump into that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things one of the kind of key things that he calls out in On Fairy Stories is like a mark of a good fairy story is that is the mark of consolation, that it's consoling, and the consolation of the happy ending. And I'm like, when I read this story, I'm just like, oh, it's so consoling. Like it's not consoling, and it's like, oh, you poor thing, it's going to be okay. But it's just like consoling in the way that you sort of can only envision heaven itself being consoling, right? And like consoling in the ultimate fulfillment, right, and the ultimate giving back of everything that's been lost.
Yeah. In a way that is beyond imagination, that's what these things actually mean. It's actually so much richer and deeper. It's like the painting, the two-dimensional painting, and the real thing. What he was doing there in his painting and pursuing in such a small, he's sort of self-critical, and this is just a minor thing, and it doesn't really mean much in the world. Some people kind of appreciate it, but that kind of gets lost in the world. That is something deeply human and deeply true. It has this unfathomable destiny, in the end. When all things are made new, so it's a deeply Christian perspective. There's no doubt.
Undoubtedly. I mean, he referred to it himself as a in one of his letters, he referred to it as his purgatorial short story, which when you and it just always amazes me every time I read it, the different things I see going on in it that I hadn't noticed before. And that to me is a mark of an incredible piece of work. But and I remember when that really started to come into focus for me, the purgatorial aspect of it, which it's like now once you see it, you're like, well, duh, how can I have missed this? But but you see that, like, it's on one hand, there is the creative venture, the side in all of us, the sub-creator side of us that that Niggle represents, right? And this idea that Tolkien held very dearly, that we're made in the image of God, and a major part of that is being creators ourselves. So but we don't work from nothing as God does, but we work from the raw materials that he gives us, and some kind of strange inspiration that comes to us that is totally mysterious. But there's that sub-creative aspect that we see unfolding in it, in how Niggle is never able to quite give the attention to this creative venture that you can tell this is so dear to his heart, so much a part of who he is, and he's never quite able to give the full attention to it that he desires. But in the end, it's somehow given a greater reality, that he totally didn't see coming. Which Tolkien mentions this in other contexts outside of even Leaf by Niggle. So it's almost like it was this sort of little thing of nugget of mysticism that he had sort of hidden away in his own heart. But then you have the relationship between Niggle and Parish, and the journey that Niggle goes on, which starts off very unpleasantly, but somehow we see this change unfolding within Niggle, and it has to do with how he related to Parish.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I think that is actually a central feature of the story, to be sure. And a central feature of, the journey that Niggle has to make is to become whole, to become a full person. And to become a full person in the perspective that Tolkien has, the Christian perspective, is to be someone who's self-giving and elevates others, and there's this sort of sense that human community is only possible fully, and when people are when sin is rooted out and burned away. And that's sort of that purgatorial aspect. You can see that their relationship, there's nuggets of there's like hope, there's promise, there's a dim view in the way that Niggle behaved in the world before his journey. And you see that, and that's what sort of was cultivated in the purgatorial dimension and brought to full fruit, not even into complete fruit, because the journey continues on. Like Parish still has a lame leg, but there's a way in which they're how they're meant to be together, and it's flourishing, and it's happy, and it's joyful, and it's meaningful. They do meaningful work together in the next world, in the world to come, that it goes on and on forever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking about how, just in that really, like, talking of Niggle's journey, it struck me this time where it had said that, like, Niggle was aware of this journey, like he knew it was coming, but he did nothing to prepare for it. He didn't want to prepare for it. And my first thought was, well, why not? I love to pack. Like, I love, like, the excitement of a journey. Like, it's just fun. And then I was like, oh, wait, this is a journey he's not excited about. That's why he doesn't want to prepare. But then I got thinking about, like, knowing what this journey was, having read the story before, I was thinking, like, well, why not? Like, why did he, it's that whole, like, worldly attachment idea, right? Like, he didn't want to prepare. And even if he had gotten to the point of wanting to prepare, like, how could he have prepared? And then you think about, his relationship with Parish, and how, just the different opportunities he had to prepare in a way that he just didn't, he chose not to. And I was just thinking about, just how that is, made real, and just like in human nature, think of all the ways that we should be preparing for this journey as well, and all the chances we have to, and yet we continue to not.
Yes, we're very good at avoiding our mortality.
Yes, we are.
That's sort of, that's how we spend most of our existence.
So
Avoiding mortality.
true.
Yeah, absolutely.
So true.
Attempting to.
Yes, attempting to. Exactly. Exactly.
Vain attempt.
Because it's uncomfortable, right? I mean, it's not a fun thing.
Well, and that's, and that's something you see within so strongly within the Middle Earth Legendarium as well. That in a way that's like one of the key themes of the whole Legendarium is this avoidance of mortality, or attempt to best one's mortality. And that inevitably goes awry. Of course, in this story, it's a little bit, there's a little bit more of a lighthearted tone to it all. I like every time I've read it over the last few years, I'm struck by this sense of moral priorities. We like the first half of the story almost has to do with this. Is it a dilemma? This moral sort of quandary that Niggle finds himself in, which is that I never have enough time to do the thing that I feel most drawn to, which is to paint this tree, right? And eventually I have this vision to paint like the landscape that it's a part of and everything like that. But, I never have quite the time I want to, because I'm always getting bothered by old Parrish and then, it's like, I think he does sense that he should be prioritizing Parrish more, but at the same time, he's just kind of like, but I think I'm okay. I think I'm okay not to, it's like,
it's like the lowest common denominator, right?
Yeah.
It's like, what is like the bare minimum that I can
Yeah, exactly.
It's a mirror, like Greta said.
Yeah.
A good story. It's a mirror that we hold up to ourselves. We are like Niggle in so many ways.
So many. Yeah.
It's an examination of conscience. I mean, it's like the story is a total examination of conscience.
Yes. And I was thinking about that too. Like, just when you mentioned examination of conscience, like in the preparation, like I was thinking about preparation and I was thinking about confession, and I was like, man, how many times, like, do we have the opportunity to go to confession that we're just like, nah, I'm good. Like, I don't need it, way too many times as far as I'm concerned, for me personally. But
well, how many times are there like opportunities to help somebody out, even, just in a small way that, we don't necessarily take advantage of, take advantage of as well. I mean, and there's of course the whole idea that like this other character's name is Parrish, and the symbolism of that name, right? That the idea of the Catholic parish, being the community of the local local Catholic community being the parish, and even it's actually, I think technically it's not just confined to those who are Catholic, but to the geographical area of that particular church, right? That particular local Catholic community. And so it's like he wants, this community is asking for his help, right? Parish representing the community, your neighbor, right? Love of neighbor, right? Is asking for your help. And you give the little that you need to do so that you can focus your time on what's important to you. And it's not diminishing, like, because Tolkien, that's the last thing Tolkien would have wanted to do, is like diminish the idea that like our creative works don't matter. This isn't a thing of saying like, get over your creativity and like go help somebody. Like, it's not this like hardcore message of that. And I think that's like an aspect of the story's power and beauty.
It is. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's one of the big question of an artist with a conscience and lives in this world in which you have tons of obligations. A creative, somebody does something really important to them. It doesn't necessarily have to be an artist. But there's finite resources, and there's always more that's required of you. And that tension between all of this is, I'm sorry, I don't know if you guys hear that, but
You're good.
I don't know how to turn it off.
It's a nice thing.
Okay, good. Like an idea. Ding. Yeah. So anyway, where was I? But yeah, so it's anyway, no, it captures so well that tension that we all feel. And I do think that he does intend this story to kind of be an everyman representation.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I would agree. For
yeah.
sure.
And there's so many great individual lines. You know, you're referring to the quality of the writing and the storytelling itself earlier, Chris. There's so many great individual lines in this story. One of them that I just identified with so much is, I wish I was more strong-minded, right? You know, it talks about him saying to himself, like, I wish I was more strong-minded. In the sense that, like, he wishes he could just tell Parrish to go away and stop bothering him so that he could get on with his, you know, really, really focus on this creativity. But he's never quite able to, you know, to do that. Right. And yeah, go ahead.
That's the thing he learns through the hospital. The image for purgatory is a hospital, and at least at the beginning, and he has to be healed. And one of the things he does there is he learns how to do menial, ordinary things well, and with freedom and joy. And he realizes that I think at a point there that if he could have done that before, it would have opened up more even for what he really wanted to do. And so he gained this perspective there too.
Bread rather than jam. That's another one of the great lines that, and it's mentioned in that context as he comes to appreciate, like, the menial labor he's being given to do at the workhouse. You know, it says he started to find satisfaction in, like, these things that, you know, you're like, how could somebody find that satisfying? He started to find satisfaction, but it was bread rather than jam. So it was like just substantial,
right,
rather than sweet, right?
Yeah.
Right. You know, rather than kind of the tasty sweetness that we all tend to seek too much.
Top. Yeah.
Exactly. One of the things I wanted to mention about about Leaf by Niggle and its relationship to On Fairy Stories is that one of the things you mentioned, the idea of joy, and then later at the very end in the epilogue to On Fairy Stories, it calls it the Gloria. But one of the things that, you know, that the essence of the fairy story for him is joy, that eucatastrophe, that moment where everything is transformed and given back and times 10, you know. But one of the other aspects of the fairy story is desire, and through that On Fairy Stories, he's always talking about it awakens these desires and within us, and he lists several of them in On Fairy Stories, but they touch at the heart of what we are as human beings. We are desire for unconditioned goodness, for joy that doesn't end, for to transcend our mortal condition. I mean, he said, I think at one point he says that overcoming death is sort of the deepest and oldest desire we have. And fairy stories allow us to, you know, if in our ordinary life we're always avoiding the question of death, fairy stories allow us, if that's true about them, and it's not just fairy stories, it's all kinds of stories, they allow us to encounter that enigma of our mortality and our desire to transcend it. So there's like this filling, but also I think at one point he talks about a desire that is fairy stories both cultivate or enlarge a desire and at the same time fulfill it. And those aren't two mutually opposed things. It's like you're desiring more even as it's filled, and that's for him the ring of the true.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow.
So you see that, I guess, in Niggle's activity. He's just pursuing this one thing and he's obsessed with it. Obviously that's autobiographical, I think, with Tolkien's and it's an impossible feat to accomplish in this mortal context. It's just, you know, but that raises the question, is it meaningless? And it raises the question, what is its value in relationship to these other things that are most important? So your neighbor, loving your neighbor, and all the obligations that Parrish represents, and how do these two relate to one another? And
you know, it's like this, in this life we can only like it, and it sometimes you know, when you are called away from the thing that you most desire to be focused on at any given moment, you know, and as you get older and older, you start to realize, like, I'm only going to be able to accomplish so much in my life.
Mhm.
And even then I might not be able to accomplish the things that I feel most, that I like, that are most special to me and in my innermost being, that I really like have a vision for and want to achieve, for whatever reason. And so, it's like Tolkien is here coming to grips with that. I mean, do you know, Chris, do you know the background, like kind of the genesis of this story, like from Tolkien's, like you mentioned how it's autobiographical in a way.
Mhm.
Do you know
No,
anything about like how it came to be?
I don't.
It's a fascinating story. So, and it's pretty short. Basically, he was in the early stages of writing The Lord of the Rings. It's so in roughly, I think somewhere in the either late 30s or early 40s, he is writing the new Hobbit, because he'd had some success as a creative with the Hobbit, and they wanted the Hobbit sequel. So he's writing the new Hobbit, and he basically has no idea what he's going to do. And he's got the Silmarillion, which he's already written, which he knows is never going to see the light of day in his lifetime, because no one would publish this thing in their right mind. And he basically wakes up one morning and he just has the inspiration to write this story. And he said in a letter in 1957, so this is after Lord of the Rings was published, and he was really, I mean, he become like the guy, right? The guy that is Tolkien. He said, I have not published any other short story but Leaf by Niggle. They do not arise in my mind. Leaf by Niggle arose suddenly and almost complete. It was written down almost at a sitting, and very nearly in the form in which it now appears. Looking at it myself now from a distance, I should say that, in addition to my tree love, it was originally called The Tree. It arose from my own preoccupation with The Lord of the Rings, the knowledge that it would be finished in great detail or not at all, and the fear, near certainty, that it would be not at all. The war had arisen to darken all horizons, but no such analyses are a complete explanation even of a short story. Elsewhere, he said, this is the only story I've ever done which cost me absolutely no pains at all. Usually I compose only with great difficulty and endless rewriting. I woke up one morning this is an earlier quote, more than 2 years ago, with that odd thing virtually complete in my mind. It took only a few hours to get down and then copy out. I'm not aware of ever thinking of the story or composing it in the ordinary sense. All the same, I do not feel so detached as to not be cheered, indeed rather bowled over, by your son's comment. So anyway, and this is all in the context of somebody else's loving the story. But basically, everything else Tolkien ever wrote, he had to like wrestle. As we all know, if you do creative things, like, and especially like larger projects, you have to kind of wrestle with it. It's kind of painful, right? And getting it out, right? It's all up there, and you have to like work with it to get it out. And it's basically, he just woke up one morning and boom, the story was in his head and he wrote it out.
Remarkable.
And yeah. And
That's
it's just to know that and then read the story, like it elevates the story up even further, to being this like incredible special thing that almost seems to have this supernatural origin to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it does. I was struck by the pathos that he feels and that Niggle too feels, and that we all feel, about the fact that as we get older, you kind of glossed on this, John. Well, as we grow older, we realize when you're young, the world is your oyster in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
You have all this potential, and there's no telling what you can accomplish and do. And you have, it's an exciting way to see the world, for sure.
You're going to do everything, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You have, and we do, all of us, we have all this potential within ourselves, and you choose one thing and you close a lot of doors. And as you, to be good at anything, it takes a huge commitment, and you shut down a lot of other potential of things that you could become and do by pursuing that one thing. And there's no guarantee at all that you will amount to much, in the activity that you pursue with such zeal and discipline over the years and years it takes to become that great haiku writer that you want to become, or whatever it is. And that's just part of the human experiences that, and the potential that we have is never fully realized on this side of life.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mhm.
I think part of the theory and the hope and the ambition and the goal of Tolkien is to articulate the hope that that potential that's not fulfilled here is actually a seed that's planted, will grow into the fullness that it's meant to be in God's goodness.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's a remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
It-
Yeah, it is.
It's beautiful to see in this early, these early letters well before Lord of the Rings was completed and published, that he almost had resigned, that he was never going to make it happen. He had this vision for the thing, but he was like, there's no way I'm going to make this happen. Right.
Yeah.
And, and he kind of mentions like the other priorities. He's like the war, the war is getting darker and darker every day. Right. And, he had his own family to think of as well, his own children, all of these other, his job as a college professor, all of these other competing priorities. And so it's consoling in its own way to know that he had resigned himself, that this was never going to happen. And then he's Tolkien now, right? He is the Tolkien now, right?
And what is the meaning in eternal life of the Tolkien? We have a glimpse of it, but what is it really? I mean, it's
yeah, and I think that's where when we get to when Niggle is released from the workhouse and he gets dropped off in this place that he's like, I'm not really sure where I am.
Yeah.
And then he goes on the little bike ride and it's the tree. And he realized, it's like, wait a minute, this is my tree.
Isn't it the leaf he recognizes? I feel like like there's something specific about the tree that he's like, that's my tree.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know, that's it's really, I don't know. It was just kind of interesting to me that it wasn't the tree as the whole that he was like, oh yeah, that's my tree. But he was like, wait, that's my leaf. Like that one leaf that he like, that he was working so hard on. That was what kind of made him realize that, oh, this is my tree.
Yeah, he says, before him stood the tree, his tree finished. If you could say that of a tree that was alive, its leaves opening, its branches growing and bending in the wind, that Niggle had so often felt or guesses and had so often failed to catch. He gazed at the tree and slowly he lifted his arms and opened them wide. It is a gift, he said. He was referring to his art and also to the result, but he was using the word quite literally.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And it says all the leaves he looked at it. He went on looking, all the leaves he ever labored at were there as he had imagined them rather than as he had made them.
There's a certain grandeur about, you could imagine that it's like a prideful idea that you're, what I'm doing now is going to be this like great thing in the world to come. But there's also a real humility about its place. It's like way down. It's like at the very beginning of like this journey that he has to make. He has to move on beyond it.
Yes.
The tree's there at the beginning, and it's for others too.
Yes.
Parrish is going to build his house there with him when his wife shows up, and they're going to be there and somehow grow in the right way before they move on. But it's so there's a certain humility to his perspective as well.
Yeah.
And it's like the thing that gets him released from the workhouse in the first place is that he starts to regret the way that his attitude towards Parrish.
Right.
And he starts, not only does he regret his attitude, he literally starts to wish Parrish was there with him, right? That he wishes Parrish was with him, right? And so it goes even beyond just this regret. It's like, I wish he was here, this guy that he couldn't even like really stand, otherwise. And he's just like, I wish he was here with me.
Shows a real change of heart in him. To have that attitude. And that was something else I think that struck me was this this whole idea of regret. And like you're right, like that's what you said, he begins to regret all the ways in which he failed his neighbors, right? All the ways in which he, he could have done better and didn't. But he doesn't dwell on that. Like he doesn't he doesn't let it get him down. Instead, he's like, yeah, it would have been different, but it wouldn't have been better. And I just think that's so, I don't know. That just sticks with me. Like, yeah, it would have been different, but not better,
Mhm.
and I think that's what regret is often like that. That's what fuels regret, right? Is this idea that it could have been better somehow.
Mhm.
But most of the times that's not true. Different, yes, but not better.
Mhm.
There's an important
Yeah.
distinction there.
Right. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah.
One of the things he captures so well is an aspect of the biblical narrative
Mm.
in which God creates this world full of potential and possibility. And he plants a man and woman there in the middle, and he gives them a task: fill the earth, multiply, draw, and this is my own language now, but draw out of this earth all the potential that it has. That's sort of the human story, is that's we are made to do that. We don't stop doing that in everything we do.
Mhm.
Our inventions, our creations, discovery of the wheel, discovery of the nuclear fusion, discover how to take how to do this and that. In our fallen, in this disordered world, that capacity to do that is also, it's intertwined with quite devastating and scary effects.
Yeah.
It's something that it's our nature to do that, and we're designed to do that. And so God made us to collaborate with him on whatever this grand project is of God's design, which we grow in understanding when we meditate on the biblical revelation. But we also grow in understanding on, I think one of the brilliant things about Tolkien is that he has the ideas he has about what he's doing as an artist they explicate that very core conception of what we are as humans with God. We're built to collaborate with God, to make the world reflect God's goodness, to saturate the world with God's goodness, with justice, with hope, with peace. And that's somehow what he sees what he's doing as an artist, as a tiny little aspect of that. There's a really theologically sophisticated mind there.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I think that because he was trained so well at interpreting myths, outside of the biblical context, that he was able to understand it so deeply. And he put that into his own mythos that he wrote, that the creatures collaborate or subcreate with the creator. You guys know a lot more about that than me, but I know that's true about his world.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember what I want to say about this thought. I have through reading Tolkien and this is a great example of how he makes us truly powerful. One of the things I value about him so much is he does not look at our creativity and say, like, that's just this add-on that we have, that's like, you can take it or leave it. But that it's a fundamental part of who we are. And it actually has something to do with the redemptive arc of our individual stories and the human story overall. And he's trying to put that into focus in this story, to say, like, wait a minute, it's never just for us. Our older son is totally into music, and he's like 15 years old and wants to do all this music stuff, and he's gifted, right? He's got a lot of talents when it comes to that. And I've been encouraging him, get your stuff out there in front of people, because at the end of the day, like, you can kind of keep it all to yourself, and you'll enjoy being creative and kind of keep it as this side hobby, but you're never going to realize the full potential and meaning of it until it's out there interacting with the ears and ultimately the hearts of other people, right? Because that's what you're given the gift for. It's like, true creativity should be a work of charity. Like, at the best creativity should be harmonious with all aspects of charity. You know, and ultimately that's like what Niggle realizes in Niggle's parish, as it comes to be known, right? When parish arrives and they work together, you know, it becomes kind of, it's almost like it's kind of the last stage of purgatory for them, right? Like it's gone from being like kind of a place of like a dark, like kind of dim, you know, place, and it's like menial labor, and it's like now it's the last stop before the final journey into the mountains, right? Into the mountains that apparently belong to the shepherd. Hint, hint, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
And it's the sharing of that joy, of that creativity, that really completes the joy. And you know, that got me thinking about you know, we talked a lot about Niggle and, you know, maybe all the ways in which he failed to, you know, be charitable towards parish, and, you know, but this is a two-way street here. Like parish had no appreciation for Niggle's art either. And, you know, it just made me think about, wow, how different could things have been? Again, not better, but different. How different could things have been if, you know, if parish had shown just a little bit of appreciation or interest in Niggle's art? And then how would that have changed Niggle's attitude toward parish?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's just like, it's a give and take. You can't just be like, oh, it's all Niggle's fault because, you know,
parish is
always grumbling.
Parish is, you come to realize parish is just as like key to this story as Niggle is in the end, right? And he has his own like we see his own transformation. And you're right when he's like talking about how, what's the thing they say about that they used to kind of he and his wife used to make fun of Niggle's work, you know, kind of behind his back and everything like that. And he confesses that to him, and then he's like, but I never like took the time to actually see it, like to actually look at it, you know, like to truly see it. I just kind of like brushed it off, you know, as your silliness. Anyway.
Yeah. It's I'm so glad that I had this opportunity to read this story again, because it really is, any writer, any creative person, any human, they should read this book, because they're going to learn things about themselves and their world.
It should be
sure.
I mean, it should be, I'm you know, I'd love to see the right person adapt it into a film. The right person, I stress, right? like, and there's probably not many people that could actually do that. But I whenever I read this story, I kind of get this quality. I feel this quality of certain movies from my own childhood that have a sort of whimsy about them, a kind of a beautiful, hopeful whimsy, often taking place in the British Isles somewhere. And you know, and it's just there's a realness to them, but at the same time they kind of border on fantasy. And I feel like, I'm not trying to be, I'm going to sound like totally like an old man about this, but I'm like, I don't know of many movies like that being made right now. Right. Maybe we live in a darker time, you know, an increasingly dark time that doesn't have as much, you know, taste for that sort of thing. I mean, there's just so much more that could be said, but I want to make sure we've saved time for the end of the story, as I alluded to earlier on. I noticed this for the first time. I don't know how many times I've read Leaf by Niggle at this point, but I realized this time that the three people talking in that penultimate scene are Tompkins, Atkins, and Perkins. They all have names that end with kin. I just noticed that. I don't know if there's something we should do with that or not, but I'm like, well, wait, Tolkien, I mean,
clearly by design.
It's got right?
Like, the subtlety of the rest of the story is so profound, and the way it communicates, that there's something there that he's communicating through that design.
I mean, I just was kind of like noodling over some possibilities. Like, what could that be? Like, are they like, is it like Ken in the sense of being like the next generation, right? Of people that kind of, because they're kind of looking back and thinking, and obviously Niggle is gone at this point, as is Parrish. So maybe it's like the next generation of people, that in that sense of kin.
Yeah.
Maybe it's supposed to be kind of like kings. These people are like the ruler, kind of like the local rulers, and like they kind of look out over everybody, and they're like, I'm in charge of being in charge of you, like because there's this like totalitarian sort of air, which I mean, this must have been like just Tolkien knew these people, like these were based on people Tolkien actually probably right?
Yeah. And maybe it's just, kind of like Johnson, Jones, and Murphy.
Yeah.
But but they're all the same with Tompkins, Atkins, and Perkins. It's like they're all the same.
And
they're just like and I think one of the neat things about this story in particular is that things like that can function on multiple levels, and that's part of the genius of the storytelling.
I mean, what in that penultimate scene, Chris, I'm just interested, like what jumped out at you about that I just feel like it's so important to the rest of the story. You feel like you come to the end when Niggle departs from Niggle's parish, but then there's this penultimate scene and then the very final scene, which is just utterly glorious and beautiful.
Yes. Yeah.
But what do you do with this penultimate scene?
Well, yeah. So I'm just looking at it now in the Tolkien reader.
Mm-hmm.
So you have right before that scene, you have where little Niggle in his old home could glimpse the mountains far away, and they got into the borders of his picture. But what they were really like and what they lies beyond them, only those can say who have climbed them. And he's going to be taking off from there towards the mountains, climbing higher up and going forward into eternity. And then it just jumps. There's a line break. There's a space, and then you have a new paragraph. It jumps to this scene, and it's people talking about him. These three guys. Counselor Tompkins is one of them. So they're like political. They're politicos, or important people in the town. They're the guys in charge. They have really important things to do. And one of them, there's three, and at least two of them are kind of see eye to eye.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's this third guy who's a bit ambivalent. I mean, he's kind of part of their crowd. He's in the end, but there's something about Niggle's painting that he was captivated by.
Speaks to him, yeah.
Yeah, and the guy that's who's that, Atkins? Whereas Tompkins and Perkins they can't comprehend it. Yeah. There's nothing useful about this. It doesn't have any use at all in making this world a better place. And in the important things in society, well-run society, and only useful things can be involved there. I mean, I think there's a critique of, just speaking from the philosophical, intellectual side of things, there's a critique of utilitarianism, which was a strong an ethical position that was pretty strong in the UK in these days, in Tolkien's day. And I think that's something that he saw as like, this is the death. This is like cutting our heart out here. Yeah. If you're gonna have this, the only things that are good are useful, and the only things that are useful are what bring the greatest good to the greatest number, and everything is judged by that. So all that art that Niggle's pursuing is valueless. It has no immediate effect. It doesn't do anything value. The only art that they talk about that's valuable is like avant-garde stuff that has some political statement to make. Right. They can't see what this painting of a leaf.
The new mind, like the young minds, the new minds. Like, I'm not saying it's completely worthless. You give it to some of these new bold thinkers, right? Who are willing to, trash, throw away what's, the old ways of thinking, right?
Progress.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it just totally makes me think of like, especially because of the historical time period in which he was writing this, it just makes me think of like, okay, he's like, this is like the Soviet Union. I mean, and it's like, it's like Nazi Germany in a way too, right? All these societies that were just kind of trying to, they were just viewing people who were who didn't kind of fit into their particular mold as trash, whether it be their works or their whole lives, right? Because at one point Tompkins is like refers to something along the lines of like throwing Niggle into the dustbin of history or something.
Yeah, he's not worthy of living. He wasn't worthy of living. He wished he would have.
Yeah.
He's expendable. Human. I mean, this captures so well the horrors of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And these guys talking.
Absolutely.
This is
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
the idea of progress, the mythos of progress of the modern age is built on a desire to overcome all the things that Tolkien held as most valuable, as most meaningful. Not only his religious faith, but the cultural aspects that faith had developed over millennia in the West. And you know, I think that he nails it there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that, you know, when it talks about using Niggle's painting to patch up a roof, you know, like when the guy comes in and he was like, why, like, this should have been already taken care of. There's plenty of stuff here to do it. And Niggle's like, what? And he's like, you're painting. And like, I was like horrified. I was like, that would be like using like the Mona Lisa for like a, you know, as a roof patch or something. I don't know. But it was just like, just that how degrading that is, you know, like how insulting that is to the idea of creativity and the creative spirit that, you know, that it could just be used to, you know, that you should have just ripped it apart. And, you know, and that's what happens at the end, right? It is ripped because what Perkins finds is just a scrap of the paper.
It does.
But he ends up framing it and it ends up in a museum. And, you know, so there's even beauty that can be brought out of that. Right?
Yeah. There's a sort of tragic element too, because the museum
yes.
burns down a few years later. It's like,
yes, exactly.
He's pretty relentless on the fairy tale ending is not there. The fairy tale where all dreams come true is actually, you know, in the beyond. And that's just a little seed.
Yeah.
But the seeds are planted here. That's the significance of this. This is the really important. If you could summarize Tolkien's philosophy in a few words, it is that, you know, fairy tales come true. And I think what he means by that is not like the kitschy, wishy-washy kind of sappy thing. He means something
much
really profound. And I think that's what Leaf by Niggle does, communicate.
Great stories. Yeah, the great stories. Yeah, the scene of the corner of it torn off, lying in a field. It was damaged but legible, a mountain peak and a spray of leaves. I can't get it out of my mind. And I love this Tompkins, who's just like grotesque, right? He's this grotesque like representation of the utilitarian, you know, totalitarian mindset. I would even say he's like out of your what, right? You know, like
what do
you even have a mind? What's that, right?
No, thank
yeah, right.
He's an automaton. He has no heart.
It's like materialism, right? You know, it's like you don't even have a mind. It's just, you know, chemical. Because at one point before that, he's like referring to, can you believe it? He said, "Pretty what? Digestive and genital organs of plants." Like that's what he sees, right? That's what Tompkins sees when he looks at a tree and the leaves on a tree and the flowers. He sees genital and digestive organs of plants, you know,
which is incredibly sad. And just also, I feel like it's grotesque in a way too, that's how his vision has been distorted, you know, and you think about just flowers, you know, they have, you know, Marianne, your wife, gave me this beautiful floral arrangement for my birthday a couple weeks ago. And I found myself like taking pictures of it and like sending it to my daughter because I was like, look how gorgeous this flower. I mean, because they have like, they can just bring you so much joy, you know, when you see them, you know, not with utilitarian, you know.
Right. Exactly.
That just makes me so sad that, I mean, that's just like gross, like digestive organs of plants.
That's all you see. Yeah. You've just created this world that has no meaning except what you want, you know, what you give to the world. And it's pretty scary.
Yes. It's devoid of goodness and beauty. And that's so sad.
Therefore devoid of humanity.
Amen.
So he, we have this, all that's left, right? So Niggle and Parrish are both gone. So then they're speaking of Niggle here, and all that's left of his painting is this leaf, and they put it in a, it says his name never came up again in conversation. Atkins, however, preserved the odd corner, most of it crumbled, but one beautiful leaf remained intact. Atkins had it framed. Later, he left it in the town museum and for a long time, while Leaf by Niggle hung there in a recess and was noticed by a few eyes. But eventually the museum was burnt down and the Leaf and Niggle were entirely forgotten in his old country. The thought has crossed my mind recently, of just like this idea that like, it'll only take a few generations before most of us are completely forgotten, right? Like complete, and everything we've done in this life is like kind of same sort of on this level physical result, right? I think like, I like my own great grandparents, right? I don't know if I could name all of them if you asked me to, right? I could probably name a few of them, but I'm not sure I can name all of them. And I certainly never knew all of them, right? I maybe knew less than half of them, right?
Right.
They're my own great grandparents, right? And so give another generation and they're completely forgotten because my kids won't know anything about them, right? And that's just kind of like this, natural cycle of things. Now, maybe some of us will be like Tolkien, right? The few, the lucky ones, right, will be like Tolkien, where we're going to be remembered for a long time. Shakespeare, right? His name's going to be remembered throughout the rest of human history, most likely, right? King David, right? You just think about like, Socrates, Plato, right? These guys. But those people are few and far between, right? And even then, like a lot of their works don't last, right? Don't actually get passed down through history.
Yep.
Yeah, you're right. Not consoling at all. Right? Like these thoughts, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But that's the thing, is that it's not the end of the story. It's not the true end of the story.
Mm-hmm.
What the utilitarians and the materialists think about the end of the story is not the true end of the story.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And he uses the word old country, right? Like that's an important description there. He says they were forgotten in his old country.
Yes.
Which is, in the past. It's, which again, it brings that idea of all things being made new. All right.
Yeah.
This was not that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. For the ancient Greeks, the immortality was achieved only in a couple of ways. You lived on through performing great deeds, in the memories of, you become like one of the great ancestors. You live on, your great deeds are remembered and set to poetry and music, and they're recited, and that's glory, that's fame, to live on. That's the only way. Well, there's a couple other ways. You do that also through reproduction, through having children. You live on in that way. And by the way, you see that so clearly in a lot of movies these days. Somebody's in a movie, a parent dies, and as they're dying, they tell the kid, I'm right here with you, forever. I'm right here. They're pointing to like their heart. I'm inside of you. It's kind of like that. It's that that represents a classic conception of a desire of immortality. What it means to be immortal is for mortals to live on, because we're ruled by death here below. We, unlike the gods above, who are immortals, we live on through our progeny, but also through our great deeds. And then thirdly, we live on through our great works of art, our great productions. And that was it. That was it. And so you can set that beside Tolkien's presentation of what it means to do great work of art. And the interesting thing in both cases is that they're both connected to the question of of our mortality, of the rule of death over us, and how we negotiate that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's understanding death and our mortality is very close to understanding, and how we relate to it is very close to understanding what art is. In all those cases, including the three Tompkins, Atkins, and the totalitarian view.
Mm-hmm. That's great background. Kind of great background on sort of the Greek philosophical view of what it means to live on beyond death, and how ultimately, like, and in a way, like Tolkien's penultimate scene there kind of puts the lie to that, or kind of says in the end, like, but even that, like, what is it truly for, right? Like, in the end. But then we get this final scene, and it's just this beautiful embodiment of the notion that the only thing that truly lasts in the end is charity, right? But charity gives life and new life and eternal life to all things, right? And eternal significance and meaning to all things. And we find out that Niggle and Parrish have both moved on at this point, and that their joint work, Niggle's Parish, is still giving. It's like a favorite train, it's a favorite train stop on this mystical train line, right? The purgatorial train line, right?
Magical mystery tour
On this other, yeah, right. On this other level. And but they're still in touch with what's left behind. But everything is laughter. Everything is laughter, and like true and joyful laughter, for them wherever they are. Right. But that they seem to have some, like, they live on, right? And not just in this kind of like they live on in our hearts, but like, no, they live on beyond your heart. Like they are actually still alive, right?
In the fullest way. That this is only just a womb for that birth into that full life.
Yeah.
So you have these competing visions, and I think Western civilization is sort of faced with these options, and it's not sure what to do with that.
Yeah.
And we all are, I suppose, but
each and every one of us. But yeah, it feels as though Western civilization has been, facing both of these options for, in a very acute way for the last century, and it seems to be losing the battle.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one way is being like Tompkins and Tompkins Perkins, and one way is recovering this ancient pagan perception. Both are see the good as this world only. It's imminent to this world. And then there's the alternative, the classic alternative, which has a vision of the good that transcends this world, but also includes this world.
Yeah.
So, I guess one of the questions that art poses to us is what speaks most fully to the depths of what we are.
Yeah.
And the
jump into that, embrace that, go for it.
The alternative you mentioned is not necessarily at odds with the other two,
or the expense of the other. Yeah.
But is the fulfillment of the other two. However, it does cost being prioritizing the one over the other two, right? Like in the sense of you may have to sacrifice your works of glory for the good of your neighbor, because with the recognition that God gives all back, right?
Yeah.
Nothing's lost in God's economy.
Yeah.
And that ultimately the well-being and love of neighbor is more important than these other things, right? It has a moral priority over these other things.
Yep. Yeah. Right on. Tolkien.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
For sure.
Such an incredible story. Well,
yeah, so good.
Chris, I just want to thank you for joining us, taking some time out of your Saturday morning to and time away from your family to, just share with us and the enjoyment of the story, and with our listeners and watchers, and giving your perspective as a philosopher and a fellow death haunted human being on this story. And just bringing a lot of additional insight to it for us. So
thank you. I had so much fun doing this.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you so much.
Great. It's a great kind of visual example of the beauty of collaboration, right? This is almost like our own little Niggles Parish right here.
Right on.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I love it. All right. Well, hey, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or the platform of your choice. If you are a 5-star fan of the Tolkien Road, you can really help us out by heading over to iTunes or your preferred source for the show and dropping us a rating and review. When you do that, it helps get the word out about the Tolkien Road, which helps us to keep on evering on. And drop us a line wherever you can find us. We'll do our best to respond to you somehow and at some point. Thanks to our amazing patrons, especially the following: John R,
Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien,
Jacob Lockham,
John H,
Eru 27,
Emilio P,
Jonathan D,
Mike M,
Robert H,
Paul D,
Julia,
Werty,
JoeBagelMan,
Jacob S,
Richard K,
Matt R,
Matthew W,
Garret P,
Chris K,
John W,
Eugene D,
Chris B,
Daniel S,
Seb M,
Shana Supreme,
Ms. Anonymous,
Andrew T,
Redhawk,
Shannon S,
Brian O,
Zeke F,
James L,
Chris L,
Chuck F,
Asya V,
Ish of the Hammer,
Teresa C,
David of Pints with Jack,
Eric B,
and Johanna T.
Thank you all so much for
you
your support. Thank you to all of our amazing patrons. Thanks to everybody for watching and or listening. We will talk at you next time.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.